This story began with a small commotion in a beautiful old building where many people had gathered. A notary was about to read a will. The notary, an elderly man, began reading the last testament of Riella Anden Coin, a woman known across much of the world for her immense wealth and influence. To everyone's surprise, Duchess Hoson, Valeria herself, had decided to bequeath her entire incredible inheritance, including rare magical stones, to a girl who wasn't even her relative. That girl was Riella Tanar, a young woman from a poor and simple family. Even Riella had no idea why the Duchess had chosen her. Riella had spent her whole life in a small village, poor but full of warmth. She knew and loved every inhabitant, and they loved her in return. Remarkably, the village was known for its delicious, inexpensive fruits and vegetables, as well as high-quality fabric. Riella, who adored flowers, worked tirelessly in her flower shop and, on that particular day, was carrying an armful of blooms. The cheerful grocer, Mr. Carl, was the first to spot the flowers, and then Riella behind them. He greeted her warmly. Friendly and polite as always, Riella gave him a bright smile and returned the greeting. Everyone in the village regarded Riella as a hard-working girl, and she lived up to their expectations, tending to her shop with great dedication. Time flew by when she worked with plants, and she rarely felt tired. The peaceful hum of the flower shop was suddenly broken by the cheerful voice of a red-haired girl named Rena, Riella's close friend. Wanting to give Riella a break, Rena had brought along a feast of juicy, delicious food. At the sight of the dishes, Riella's mouth watered, and she gladly agreed to take a break. As the girls ate, Rena shared the latest gossip. She mentioned having seen their friend Emma at the mansion. Curious, Riella asked how Emma was doing. Rena replied that Emma had said everything was fine, but she hadn't looked it. She appeared worried and tired, despite trying to stay brave. Emma was deeply concerned for the estate's mistress, the elderly Lady Evelyn, who hadn't eaten for 2 days. Even the best doctors had given bleak predictions about her condition. Rena had to cut the conversation short, though, when her break ended and she dashed back to her own store. Left alone, Riella found herself thinking about Lady Evelyn. She had known the old woman, who had done much for the good of the village. Riella prayed for her recovery. But sadly, that very evening, the villagers were called to pay their respects. Lady Evelyn had passed away. Riella could only hope the kind lady had found peace in a better world. She began preparing flowers in remembrance. The next morning, people flocked to her shop to buy flowers for the funeral. At first, Riella charged only a small amount and sold them with a warm smile. One by one, people came. Men in hats, women with children, and each took at least a flower. A young girl even bought a whole bouquet, and after her more people followed suit, eager to show their respect. By noon, Riella had completely sold out, but the demand continued. Thinking quickly, Riella made a bold decision. She temporarily closed her shop and rushed out. When she returned, she brought back a large bouquet of beautiful lilies. This time, however, the price was much higher than before. It wasn't long before someone questioned the cost. A man accused her of trying to profit from the grief of poor villagers. But Riella stood her ground. She explained firmly that the flowers were priced that way for a reason, and she would not lower it. The man examined the flowers, trying to understand what made them so special. But he couldn't see it. And neither could the others. The customers disappeared, and Riella was left alone, knowing that the value of the flowers was invisible to everyone but her. Nearby flower sellers mocked her for the high price, but Riella ignored them. Her sadness lay elsewhere. Since childhood, she had possessed a rare gift. She could distinguish between luminous and non-luminous flowers, and the lilies she had brought back were luminous, filled with a beauty and energy far beyond what the others could perceive. Meanwhile, in a military camp set up in a secluded field, far from civilian life, a letter arrived for the Grand Duke. It was from Duchess Hoson. Along with the letter, she enclosed a mysterious flower, one that glowed softly, as though infused with magic. Back in her flower shop, Riella sat quietly, lost in memory. She remembered a day long ago, walking with her cheerful sister through the forest. That day, their mother had given them a simple task, to collect a few flowers, but not too many. It should have been easy. While her oldest sister eagerly gathered the brightest, most eye-catching blooms, little Riella wandered uncertainly, unsure of what to choose. Then, ahead of her, she saw a faint glow. A tiny, humble flower, barely noticeable among the others, yet it shone with a gentle light. Drawn to it, Riella knelt down to admire its glow and called her sister over excitedly. Her sister, however, was unimpressed. To her, the flower looked plain, even a little odd. She couldn't see the glow Riella was talking about and refused to pick it. Later, the two girls returned home. Riella carrying her glowing flower, and her sister holding a large and showy one. Their mother gratefully accepted both bouquets. But flowers don't last forever. Eventually she had to clear them away, only to discover, with great surprise, that Riella's small flower had not withered at all. It was still fresh and beautiful. From that moment on, she realized her youngest daughter had a unique gift for choosing flowers. But that gift came with its burdens. One day Riella came running home in tears. Alarmed, her mother comforted her and gently asked what was wrong. Sobbing, Riella explained, "Everyone lied to me. They said the flowers weren't glowing." Her mother was puzzled. She hadn't lied, and she didn't understand what her daughter meant. Through her tears, Riella confessed that she truly saw the flowers glow, even though no one else could. Her wise mother gently advised her to keep the glow a secret. "Bring those glowing flowers to me," she said. "I will always see their beauty." Riella had never forgotten that. Her mother had always been someone who comforted and believed in her, and though she was gone, Riella still held on to the hope that one day she would meet someone else who could also see the flower's magical glow. Just then, something extraordinary broke the quiet rhythm of the village. A richly decorated carriage appeared on the dusty road, something never seen in their humble area. Riella heard the rhythmic clatter of hooves, rare in these parts, and turned to look. The magnificent carriage, drawn by a team of horses, sped down the narrow street. She stood frozen, mouth open in awe. To her astonishment, the carriage stopped, right in front of her. Villagers who were still awake gathered quickly, murmuring in disbelief. They all stared at the elaborate crest on the carriage door, instantly recognizing the symbol. It belonged to a gemstone magician, members of a powerful order famous throughout the world. No one could believe their eyes. Then from the carriage stepped an elderly woman with a commanding presence, Duchess Hoson herself. She was not only a noble woman, but also a legendary gem magician, famous for having once defeated the black dragon Nind. Dollaria Anden Coin, admired by both adults and children, had brought peace to many lives. And now she stood before them. Riella's heart pounded. Why would someone of such high status come to a place like this? Why would her carriage stop for a poor village girl? And yet the Duchess didn't glance at anyone else. With a solemn expression, she walked straight toward Riella. Meanwhile, for some reason, Duchess Hoson asked how much Riella's flowers cost. The girl was completely stunned that Hoson had spoken to her at all, and for a moment she didn't understand what was being asked. Then the Duchess, her stern expression softening into a gentle smile, repeated the question, asking again for the price of Riella's flowers. Still in disbelief that someone of such high status was speaking to her so kindly, Riella blushed deeply, unable to find her voice. The crowd around them hissed and muttered impatiently, urging Riella to hand the flowers over for free. "It's the Duchess herself asking," they whispered harshly. Pressured by the townspeople, Riella lowered her head and said humbly that she could not possibly take money from the Duchess. The flowers, she insisted, were just a small gift, nothing more. But the moment Hoson heard those words, heard that Riella was offering her flowers for free and calling them a mere trifle, her expression changed sharply. A shadow passed over her face, and she seemed suddenly angry. She glanced down at the price tag and asked, "Why does such an ordinary flower cost so much?" Echoing the same question that the villagers had asked earlier. Before, Riella had stood by her decision with quiet confidence. But now, faced with the Duchess's sharp gaze, her courage wavered. She knew all too well that anyone who couldn't see the flower's magical glow might think she was simply trying to overcharge grieving villagers. Overwhelmed, Riella closed her eyes in fear, unsure what to say or do. But then, something completely unexpected happened. The Duchess spoke again, this time not with anger, but with a calm authority that carried through the silent crowd. "This price," she said, "is far too low for flowers this beautiful." She turned to her cheerful young assistant and asked if she agreed. The assistant nodded at once, her face lit with genuine admiration. "They are worth far more," she said. A ripple of astonished gasps spread through the crowd. The same people who had scolded Riella only moments ago now stood speechless. None of them had ever imagined that anyone, let alone the Duchess, would suggest paying more for Riella's flowers than for anyone else's. Meanwhile, the Duchess gently took the flowers in her hands, breathed in their scent, and, much to everyone's shock, named a price 10 times higher than what Riella had asked. Riella, stunned, could barely comprehend the enormous value Hoson had just placed on her flowers. "The Duchess will take them all," she announced. Nia, her assistant, immediately handed Riella a check, assuring her it could be verified at any bank. Riella, overwhelmed and confused, stared blankly at the slip of paper. For a moment, it looked as though her very soul had left her body from sheer emotional overload. Seeing this, Nia gave Riella a gentle tap on the head and urged her to count the money. Still in disbelief, Riella unfolded the envelope. The check inside shimmered with a glow she had never seen before, and she had to turn away, momentarily blinded. She had never imagined earning so much money from selling her flowers. As the villagers crowded around to catch a glimpse of the check, the Duchess asked where the flowers had come from. Riella replied, a bit shyly, that she had grown them herself. Hoson raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. Sensing the doubt in her expression, Riella added quickly that she had nurtured them carefully in pots with her own hands. Suddenly, Hosang's demeanour changed. Her calm presence shifted into something sharper as she asked whether Riella always sold her flowers there. Riella nodded. "I cannot stay long," the Duchess said, her tone solemn once again. "I must visit an old friend." She turned to leave. Riella quickly bowed as deeply as she could, while the stunned villagers looked on. Moments later, the Duchess climbed into her richly adorned carriage and left for the mansion of her deceased friend, Evelyn. As soon as she disappeared from sight, all eyes turned to Riella. The villagers began to bombard her with questions about the flowers, the Duchess, and what had just happened. But Riella herself had no answers. Meanwhile, the Duchess's carriage pulled up in front of Evelyn's estate. The servants, already prepared for her arrival, led her inside to the room where Evelyn now rested, serene in a bed of white linens. Hoson approached, took her old friend's cold hand and whispered softly, "You lived a good and noble life." Then, from beneath her cloak, the Duchess drew one of Riella's glowing flowers and placed it gently in Evelyn's hands. The flower pulsed with light, brighter than before. And Hoson smiled. "She would have loved this lily," she said quietly. Glancing at the rest of the flowers nearby, the Duchess shook her head. "One of Riella's blooms is worth more than all the others combined." But she couldn't linger. there was still more to be done. She requested to be taken to Evelyn's legendary Room of Stones. As Hosang, Nia and a servant walked through the long corridor, the Duchess drifted into memory. 40 years ago, she and Evelyn had fought side by side during a brutal war. Evelyn had once told her she noticed things that even Hosang didn't see in herself. They had faced a powerful dragon that had awoken from its slumber. Evelyn had bravely drawn the beast's attention, giving Hosang the time she needed to gather her magic. Together, they had defeated it. Later, bruised and bandaged, Evelyn had sat smiling in her mansion, while Hosang, relatively uninjured, came to visit. Hoson had always been frustrated that the glory was given only to her. But Evelyn had simply said, "That's how I wanted it. Peace matters more than recognition." Now, walking into Evelyn's memory-filled home, Hosang felt the ache of loss more keenly than ever. When they arrived at the Room of Stones, the servant asked the Duchess to inspect their condition. Her son nodded and turned to Nia. "The flowers," she said. Nia hesitated, clearly reluctant. "But they're so rare," she whispered. "Are you sure you want to give them away?" Hoson's eyes narrowed. "Give them to me," she ordered. Flustered, Nia obeyed, handing them over in silence. The Duchess entered the room with reverence. To her surprise, it wasn't as dusty or gloomy as she had imagined. But one central dome stood empty. The gemstone it had once held, destroyed during battle. She remembered how Evelyn had cared deeply for that particular stone. Possel's gaze drifted to the moonstones lining the walls. They still radiated a gentle power. She approached them, praising them softly for protecting Evelyn all these years. With great care, she placed Riella's glowing flowers before them. She summoned her magic, blending it with the power of the flowers, and to her satisfaction, the stones responded. One by one, they flickered with light, then dimmed peacefully. The stones were free at last. Like Evelyn, they had earned their rest. Meanwhile, Riella found herself at the centre of gossip. Everyone around her whispered about her selling flowers to Duchess Hoson. But paying no attention to the murmurs, Riella quietly signed a notice board with an invitation to a memorial for Evelyn, an event she was organising entirely at her own expense. She turned to Rena for her opinion on the inscription. Rena liked the idea, which made Riella smile. However, Rena didn't understand why Riella would spend all the money she had earned from the flowers on this celebration. After all, she had worked hard for it. But Riella only replied that everyone had been kind to her all her life, and she simply wanted to give back. Rena didn't argue. She just asked Riella to bring more treats, since they'd be going on a picnic later. Riella's joy over spending her money meaningfully was short-lived. Soon after, Nia returned, putting on an emotional display. With teary eyes, she pleaded with Riella to accept a new payment, this time 10 times more than before. Holding out the sparkling check, she insisted that Riella make a final decision, refusing to back down. Nia offered several reasons why the girl should accept the money, but Riella hesitated, overwhelmed. She remembered how, a few days earlier, Duchess Hosong's servant had visited her with a request. Grow as many flowers as possible, and grow them entirely by herself. The servant had even taken her hands in his, trying to reassure her. Before they left, Hosong's assistant stepped in and gently pushed the servant aside. They asked if Riella had any questions, but she didn't know what to say. She found the whole situation odd. Why would the Duchess choose her, an unknown florist, instead of one of the famous names in the city? Though bursting with questions, Riella said nothing. She simply agreed to send the flowers at the appointed time and spent the following days consumed with anxiety over the responsibility. Now, as Nia stood before her again, Riella wanted to refuse the new offer. But just then, a neighbour entered her shop. Panic surged in Riella. She didn't want anyone to see the check. It would only fuel the gossip. Noticing the girl's fearful expression, Nia quickly came to her rescue. Smiling slyly, she discreetly cast a spell and handed the altered document to the curious neighbour. To Riella's shock, the man looked at it and declared it was merely an invitation to a tea party hosted by Duchess Hoson. Still confused but visibly relieved, Riella turned to Nia, who flashed her a mischievous smile and stuck out her tongue playfully, a signal that everything was under control. In that moment, Riella realized Nia was a magician. She was filled with awe and a touch of envy. Riella wasn't ready for a tea party, but Nia promised to take care of it and return to the mansion. There, she found Duchess Hoson resting in a flower garden, reading peacefully. Without turning around, the Duchess asked how things had gone. Nia, now dressed differently, bowed and said the delivery was complete and the interference had been dealt with. The Duchess smiled knowingly. The power of the rogue sapphires hasn't been used in a long time. Nia corrected her. Illusion sapphires. I drew their strength from Riella's flower. The Duchess raised an eyebrow in surprise. The sapphires had nearly been depleted, but a single flower had fully restored them. Looking fondly at her assistant, she noted, "There's more than enough greed in you." Unfazed, Nia replied, "Greed is one of the sapphire's core virtues." Then her gaze landed on the letter on the Duchess's desk. "Who's that for?" she asked. "For Archduke Haun," Hoson replied. Nia immediately grimaced. She hated that man and couldn't understand why the Duchess had anything to do with someone like him. Horsek, smiling at the girl's reaction, reminded her gently to choose her words more carefully. Still, Nia grumbled for a while before finally settling down, though she remained visibly upset. Archduke Haun, 25th brother of the king, was the strongest stonemancer of the century. He wielded the onyx of vengeance, a cruel and temperamental gem. His strength was such that he had once single-handedly subdued a dragon before it could emerge from its underground lair. But none of this impressed Nia. She didn't care about Huan's achievements. Then a thought occurred to Hoson, and she smiled to herself. "I feel like playing with Huan." Nia perked up instantly. She had always dreamed of ruining the Archduke's life. The Duchess nodded. "Remember, I promised him my stone chamber." Nia gasped in protest. "You're not allowed to leave this world yet." But Hoson remained calm. At 82, she felt she had lived a good life. Nia, however, began to shout. She insisted the Duchess could live for many more years and manage her affairs just as well. After all, Huan had only taken over the northern front to ease her burdens and had somehow managed to handle both the western and southern fronts too. An unprecedented feat. But the reason for all of Huan's efforts was clear. Duchess Hoson. He wanted her to retire so he could finally take her place. 5 years ago, they had made a pact. In exchange for managing her responsibilities, Hoson would one day bequeath her stones to him. That promise still held. Sighing, the Duchess ended her recollection. She turned to Nia and asked, "When is the dragon fad expected to fall asleep?" 2 months, Nia replied, though she added that Huan's recent victories might have accelerated the timeline. The Duchess considered this. She had every reason to follow through on her promise to the Archduke. But then her gaze landed on the glowing flowers Riella had given her. She said nothing, but a new idea began to form. Without explaining, she declared, "We'll finish for today, let's rest." Meanwhile, on the northern front, the gem majors sat in a circle, resting after another battle. The Stonemancers chatted about the latest gossip, including that the dragon fleet had gone into hibernation, and that Archduke Han was trying to decipher what Duchess Hoson wanted from him, especially since she'd unexpectedly asked in a letter whether he had a girlfriend. Han grumbled to himself. First, the Duchess asked him to take her place on the battlefield, and now she was inquiring about his love life. He reread the letter several times, searching for hidden meaning, but found none. The next morning, Riella rode a carriage to Duchess Hosang's tea party, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. She was beautifully dressed and held a single glowing flower, a rare bloom that only appeared once every few decades. Though small, it was her chosen gift, one she hoped would be meaningful. Buying something with money felt inappropriate. She hoped that her flower, grown with love and care, would suffice. Upon arrival at the mansion, a gallant and impeccably dressed servant greeted her and politely asked her to wait. Riella found herself in an opulent drawing room, filled with an overwhelming spread of sweets and richly decorated shelves. The luxury made her nervous, so much so that she hardly dared to move. She questioned once again why a noble like Duchess Hoson would invite someone like her. Just as she considered leaving to fetch a better gift, a sudden, piercing scream echoed through the hall. Though Riella knew it was impolite to eavesdrop, her curiosity got the better of her, and she leaned toward the door. At that moment, the door burst open. Mrs. Camilla, the source of the shouting, stormed in and accidentally struck Riella, who had been listening at the door. Camilla's face twisted in disgust at the sight of the unfamiliar, plainly dressed girl. Riella, now sitting on the floor and clutching her flower pot, rubbed her aching head. Camilla, full of fury, demanded Riella be removed, along with her dusty pot. But the butler intervened, informing her that Riella was an official guest of the Duchess. Camilla refused to believe it. She leaned in close and demanded Riella identify herself. Calmly, Riella explained that she had received an invitation to the tea party. Camilla scoffed, mocking the very idea that someone so poor would be invited. She called Riella a liar and even accused her of begging from the Duchess. Her scorn turned to the flower. She laughed cruelly at it, calling it a pathetic gift in a cheap pot. Riella remained silent, thinking only how cruel and groundless this stranger's ridicule was. When Camilla began poking her aggressively, Riella asked her to stop. But Camilla only pushed harder. The pot slipped from Riella's hands and shattered, scattering soil and the delicate flower across the floor. Devastated, Riella knelt over the broken pot, desperately trying not to cry. Then, silence fell. Duchess Hoson stood at the threshold, impeccably dressed, her face like thunder. Camilla, who just moments before had been spitting venom, instantly transformed into a sweet and humble lady. She bowed gracefully, introduced herself, and claimed she had come to deliver the Soria stone to the Duchess, and had been waiting all morning. But Hoson said nothing. She stared at Camilla with icy fury. The silence grew thick. Riella, mortified by the broken flower and the mess on the floor, assumed the Duchess was angry at her. She quickly knelt and began cleaning the dirt, hoping to fix her mistake. Her heart ached when she saw the flower, crushed and wilting, but the roots were intact. Perhaps it could be saved. Hosang's cold voice broke the silence. She turned to her assistant, Nia, and demanded to know why a guest had been treated so shamefully and why the flower was broken. Then she ordered Camilla to be punished. Camilla tried to defend herself, but it was too late. Nia charged at her. One blow from the magician assistant sent Camilla flying several meters. Enraged, Camilla retaliated with a spell, demanding Nia move aside. But Nia refused. Her pride had been wounded and she would not back down. Magic clashed violently. A massive explosion rocked the room and dust clouded the air. Riella, nearly engulfed by the blast, shielded herself instinctively. When the dust settled, she realized she'd been protected by a magical barrier. One created by Duchess. Turning to Riella, the Duchess offered a sincere apology for the chaos. She explained that her 2 stonemancer assistants had gotten carried away. Riella was speechless, overwhelmed by how easily the Duchess had protected her, even saving the butler. Meanwhile, Nia was finishing her game with Camilla, who was clearly no match for her in stonemancy. Lifting gracefully into the air, Nia soared over Camilla and effortlessly blocked another of her attacks. Enraged by this display, Camilla shouted curses, her voice shrill with frustration. "To put an end to the commotion," Duchess Hoson spoke sharply, ordering her assistant to finish things quickly. Obediently, Nia gathered her full strength and unleashed a concentrated surge of energy at the arrogant Camilla. The mistress stood no chance. She collapsed, unconscious, and the butler quietly assured everyone that she would be sent home immediately. With the disruption over, Hoson turned to Riella and invited her to sit at the table. She asked gently if the girl had been frightened. Riella tried to insist she was fine, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Watching her, Nia grumbled that she would have ended things with one blow if she'd known Riella would be so scared. Still, Riella put on a brave face and insisted again that everything was okay, which earned her soft smiles from both Nia and Hoson. With a sigh, the Duchess apologized for the chaos and expressed regret over the damage to Riella's gift. But Riella, ever kind, began consoling everyone instead, assuring them that she would bring a sturdier, more thoughtful gift next time. Nia, smiling mysteriously, remarked that she knew Riella would say something like that. Then she stepped aside to reveal something unexpected. The flower, whole and undamaged, back in its pot. Riella gasped in surprise, barely believing her eyes. She quickly realized that this miracle had something to do with the power of the stones. Hoson nodded and explained that Nia had used the rovra, a restoration stone capable of repairing small damages. Lifting a teacup to her lips, the Duchess added that glowing Riella flowers, like the one Riella had brought, could greatly enhance the stone's power, sometimes even beyond the physical space they occupied. Stunned, Riella processed this new information. Then a thought struck her. Did the Duchess also see the glow in the flowers? Hoson confirmed with a slight smile and suggested they move to the garden for a longer conversation. In the fragrant garden, surrounded by lush greenery, Riella spoke openly about how she'd begun to see light in flowers and how she had kept this strange ability to herself. She explained how much she'd hoped the flower she brought would please the Duchess. Hoson listened intently, then spoke solemnly. That kind of flower should not be consumed. Confused, Riella asked what she meant. Instead of answering directly, Hoson asked Riella how much she knew about stone-mancers and their stones. Riella mentioned the famous battle with the dragon Neon, which she had read about in the newspapers, and also spoke of the Archduke's struggles. The Duchess nodded. Riella's knowledge of the basics was solid. She then explained that all stones have different properties and limited energy. Their power is not infinite, and once depleted, a stone can fall into hibernation. To illustrate, Hoson used Nia's illusion stone and conjured a magical display for Riella. A breathtaking vision so realistic that Riella reached out and touched one of the butterflies fluttering nearby. But as the stone's energy was exhausted, the illusion faded, and the stone became dormant. Curious, Riella asked how Nia had used the stone earlier, if it was already asleep. Hoson explained honestly, glowing flowers like the one Riella had brought could awaken even sleeping stones. Originally, such flowers were extremely rare and dim, but now Riella's glowed brighter than any seen before. Realizing the implications, Riella asked if it was possible to awaken all dormant stones using these flowers. But then a shadow crossed her face. What would happen if others learned how to grow them? Would she be imprisoned or forced to grow them forever? To her surprise, Hoson was taken aback. She asked why Riella wasn't trying to profit from such a valuable ability. Riella admitted she was afraid of being locked away and used. Quietly, the Duchess admitted that she was tempted by the flowers, but locking someone away to grow them was far too cruel. She had no intention of doing that. Relieved, Riella exhaled deeply. She wasn't in danger. She could continue her life freely. Finally, Hoson said with a small smile that she'd like to be friends with Riella, but their paths in life were too different. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "Do you have a boyfriend?" Riella blinked, completely thrown by the question. After everything that had just been said, she didn't even know how to answer. Meanwhile, Archduke Han had just returned to his mansion from the front lines, exhausted and longing for some rest. The battles had taken a toll on him, but so had the endless visits in the capital, where every nobleman seemed to arrive with the same goal, to marry off his daughter to the Archduke. Han, however, had no interest in marriage. He cursed his own prestigious lineage, which had turned him into one of the kingdom's most eligible bachelors, even though he had long since renounced his claim to the throne. Still, the fathers remained relentless. In Han's mind, the political matchmaking felt more draining than the battlefield itself. As he brooded, the door suddenly burst open. His younger brother, grinning ear to ear, had arrived. Having heard rumours that the Archduke was reconsidering the throne, the brother playfully accused him of treason. He dropped into a chair and, still teasing, said that if Han really wanted the throne, he should say so directly. Han grimaced and waved the idea away with disdain, declaring that he wouldn't take the throne even if it were handed to him. His brother was surprised Han had even returned to the mansion, but he welcomed it, since he had business to discuss. The topic soon turned to the dragon Flyard, who had unexpectedly fallen into Slima much earlier than anticipated. Han was intrigued, and his brother looked pleased. It meant they could continue developing the northern region. Just as the prince was about to say more, he stopped mid-sentence. Han, sensing hesitation, impatiently urged him to speak. With some reluctance, his brother asked whether it was time for Han to finally settle in the capital, at least while he still had the freedom to travel. Han instantly understood what he meant. "I'm not getting married," he said flatly. He found it almost absurd that his personal life had become a matter of national concern. His brother explained that their mother had sent him to check in on Han and to see if he had anyone in mind. Han sighed and asked him to stop with the interrogation. He didn't even have a romantic interest, let alone plans for marriage. But as he firmly declared his refusal to wed, Han couldn't help but wonder, what kind of person would it even be to fall in love with? He'd read too many stories of entire nations crumbling under the weight of foolish, blind love. The idea seemed dangerous. Just then, a letter caught his eye on the desk. Picking it up, he realized it was a love letter, clearly not meant for him. He scowled and barked at the assistant, demanding to know if this was what a report was supposed to look like. The assistant, flustered and embarrassed, quickly snatched it back, apologizing profusely and promising not to mix up documents again. Han remained irritated, though more with himself than anyone else. The assistant was clumsy, yes, but unfortunately irreplaceable. Finally, unable to keep it in, Han declared loudly to everyone present that he had no intention of starting any kind of romantic relationship. At the same time, Duchess Hasang's assistant, Nia, had decided to visit Riella, whom she had come to consider a friend. Riella was delighted to see her, even if the visit momentarily pulled her away from work. Nia noticed Riella struggling to move the large notice board and, to her surprise, effortlessly lifted it on her own. "Where do you want it?" she asked cheerfully. Riella blinked, assuming the feat was due to the power of stones. But Nia laughed and said it was all her own strength. Amazed, Riella thanked her and Nia offered to help with anything else she might need. As the two worked together in the flower shop, Nia reminded her that they still had to head to the mansion soon. Once their tasks were complete, the two girls climbed into the carriage and set off for Duchess Hasang's estate.